Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires, patch 4.0, Shadows of Change DLC. And I want to talk about what is, without a doubt in my mind, though let me know what you guys think, but without a doubt in my mind, the most boring and least replayable campaign in the entire game. And I'm of course talking about the Changeling. Now, to be very clear, the Changeling is a very powerful legendary lord. You can assume the form of other legendary lords in battle. For instance, here I have the form of Vlad von Karstein with all of his spells and quite a few of his abilities, actually all of his abilities. So he is a monster in battle. His army is also a really good one, even if you don't own the Warriors of Chaos DLC, though of course with the Warriors of Chaos DLC and the Changeling, the Shadows of Change DLC, you end up with a really powerful and potent force. The power is there. The campaign mechanics, at least in theory, are not horrible either. You're not a horde army, you're a Skaven Undercity faction. In the sense that you don't take control over regular settlements, you build Undercities. And the Undercities you have are the strongest in the game. Because you can keep control over those Undercities, even if a settlement, like Hellpit in this case, has been completely eliminated, has been wiped from the face of the earth. But there are, of course, issues. And while I consider the Changeling the most powerful legendary lord in the game by far, it is also the most boring campaign. One of the things to mention about powerful legendary lords is that they can be pretty awful to play, because while it's fun to steamroll your enemies to a certain degree, without a doubt, it ends up being pretty lackluster, especially when we're talking about replayability. I'm pretty sure Warriors of Chaos right now are, and Wood Elves are certainly two of the two of the least played races in the game, because their campaigns are of a similar nature, in the sense that you don't really have any kind of threat, any kind of issue, any kind of struggle. And if you eliminate the struggle from a campaign on any difficulty, but I'm talking here legendary very hard, if you eliminate the struggle from a campaign, if you make it so that a player is just clicking this button right here over and over and over again without much happening or without anything that is interesting happening on the campaign map, then things are going to get pretty dull very quickly. Now, this is an issue in a lot of campaigns. In fact, the vast majority of campaigns. There's very few campaigns, or none at all, that can be interesting past, like, say, turn 40, 60. For some people that do like playing a long campaign for many, many turns, even for those kind of people, a Changeling would still be one of the worst campaigns in the game, from a fun factor. I'm sure people will enjoy it, but to me, this really represents a disconnect between Creative Assembly, how they design their game, the ideas they put behind the design of that game, and how the game is actually played. And that, to me, is really the issue, because it really strikes me that Creative Assembly, or at least a good portion of people in Creative Assembly, don't quite understand how their game is meant to be played. And it is a pretty jarring experience to have something like the Changeling as opposed to the Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs, the previous DLC. We don't have to go any further than that, because the Chaos Dwarfs are exactly the opposite. The Chaos Dwarfs are fun to play because they have such campaign mechanics that push you as a player to put in effort, managing your economy, managing the laborers, building up that economy in a proper fashion, and having that economy being vulnerable, having scalability. It's that balance between having power but also vulnerability, because in a Chaos Dwarf campaign, while certainly you can gain a lot of power, that power has to be earned, isn't given away freely, because in order to have really powerful armies, you need to build a powerful economy. It's not just money, it's not just a gold value, it's about getting resources, the right resources. You need to get raw materials, which require labor, then laborers, and once you've gotten those raw materials, you need to build factories, and you need to keep the flow of raw materials going, and which means that you need to keep the flow of laborers going as well in a campaign. It creates a really good campaign dynamic with them. This is exactly the opposite in the Changeling campaign. In the Changeling campaign, once you get going, nothing is stopping you. There's almost no challenge in the entire campaign. None of the quest battles, and he has the most quest battles of any campaign in the entire game. None of the quest battles, none of the other factions, no one can even try and stop him. Now, I understand Creative Assembly was trying to do something different with the Changeling. They were trying to make a stealth campaign. They were trying to stay true to the character. He is a troll. He's not a conqueror. He's not an empire builder. He is a troll. But I think that we see the limit of a design like this in a campaign when we start playing the Changeling. So what are the issues? Well, let's go over them. First off, you have some of the most powerful armies in the game. Flat out. The reason their armies are so powerful is because you have a combination. You have the unit roster of Tzeentch, Warriors of Chaos. And if Warriors of Chaos were already powerful enough, make no mistake, the Changeling is far stronger than that. The reason the Changeling is far stronger than that is because he has the exact same units that, say, Archaon could get in his campaign, and he doesn't even have the vulnerabilities that Archaon has in his campaign. That's kind of what makes it worse, actually. Because if you lose an army as Archaon, that can hurt you because it took you time to get those units, level those units up, all that. The Changeling doesn't care because he just outright recruits the units. He recruits Chosen. He recruits Warriors of Chaos. He recruits high-level units. That's where the problems come in. There are some mods that I used in his campaign, like things like Recruit the Villa, Journey Lords mod, all that kind of stuff, but nothing that changes the unit stats during the recruitment or anything like that. The Warband Upgrades mod obviously wasn't working before the release. Like, I did this before the release, official release of the DLC. 92 turns, and it was a slog. Many campaigns can be a slog after like turn 60, but I think the Changeling is in a pretty awful state. So you have armies that are inherently powerful, but it's made worse in the Changeling campaign because, one, you have absolutely no settlement that is under threat. Your settlements can only be eliminated. The undercities you have can only be eliminated if they're detected. Basically, the only way to lose them is if you fuck up yourself. There's simply no way the AI will detect them. Which means that in this campaign, you can gain a lot of money very quickly, and you will never lose anything. That is a problem. It is virtually impossible to lose a campaign as a Changeling, far more so than it is to lose as the Warriors Cast. Furthermore, your armies in a cult area will actually be undetectable. Assuming, like I just recruited this army, it's hidden. So they cannot... So while it can be detected, to be sure, there are obviously going to be a lot of issues for them to do so. And it's like, I'm literally recruiting here. So imagine recruiting full stack in the middle of potentially hostile territory and then showing up to ruin the day. The AI is not built for this. It's not built to counter this. It can't counter this. It stands no chance against you. That's one of the issues. The other issue is the campaign dynamic that gets created for the Changeling when you are playing his campaign. See, when you're playing the Changeling, you don't actually want to eliminate any potential enemy. In fact, quite opposite. You want to leave them alive. Ideally, you don't even want to fight them at all, beyond setting up cults. The reason you never want to fight them at all is because the way you gain money, resources, hero capacity, lots of power, is by setting up the Mercantile Illusion. This, on Legendary, gives you a ridiculous amount of money. Like, you can build structures, you can set up cults and ruin settlements, or you can have them spread there. But one, it increases discoverability as opposed to decreasing it, and two, it earns significantly less money. I'm not quite sure how they thought this was going to work out so brilliantly. I mean, I guess the downside of this is you're making the AI faction stronger, but you don't really care because them being stronger is not really going to affect you. In fact, it might be a boon even if you're at war continuously with them, because then you can fight continuous battles against them and wipe out their armies as long as you don't touch the settlements. So you have this campaign dynamic where you never want to really eliminate a faction. It also goes hand in hand to the options you have with regards to a settlement that already has a cult in it. So if I were to attack a settlement that has a cult, like let's say this rebel settlement, the only option I would have there would be to raze it to the ground. I can't sack it, I can't occupy it. So you're in this situation where you want to fight battles, you want to fight your enemies, but you never want to eliminate those enemies. That means you end up in a situation where your armies will win every single battle in the campaign, but your enemies never get defeated. It genuinely kills any kind of sense of campaign progression that you might have in any particular campaign. Now, Creative Assembly's solution, if you want to call it that, for this dynamic was, and I'm pretty sure they were aware that they were creating this issue, but their solution, which really shows how divorced they are from the realities of playing their game, is to give you the theaters of war and the schemes. Here's the problem. The schemes are a bloody pain in the fucking neck to do. Like, just plain and simple. Like, fighting 12 battles against the dwarves is not a fun experience, as an example. There's a lot of hassle for rewards. Now, the rewards are powerful, but it just gets annoying. Like, for instance, if you want to get Snitch's form, you need to win a battle or ally him. Now, allying him is easy enough, but defeating in a battle, you can only get that with the Changeling himself, or that's how it was when I played this campaign pre-launch. I imagine it's still the same right now. So you're in this situation when you're playing this campaign, and this is the key to victory. This is how you achieve your short campaign and long campaign victory conditions. You need to get these schemes completed and win the final battle. This video is recorded just after fighting that final battle. So you want to do these schemes, these theaters, but the schemes themselves are just such an annoying thing to do. Remember, you're playing a campaign with a faction that genuinely cannot, like, I don't think I've lost a single battle, maybe one battle where I got a bit careless with one of my armies against Vlad, and that was early game. After that, I haven't lost a single damn battle in this campaign, despite being reckless, despite finding myself surrounded by legendary lords. Like, for instance, over here in Ulfwine, I have two armies, and, well, let's just say I've kind of been pushing extremely aggressive against Tyrion and Alariel over here in this campaign. I also have the Sword of Cain that might, also contribute to the level of success I've enjoyed over here with Sarfarael, the Everwatcher. But it gives you an idea of the kind of dynamic that is created with the Changeling, where it's an objective-based campaign. I like the idea of an objective-based campaign, but when the objectives are a hassle, and when you don't want to eliminate enemies, because or even start wars, I don't think I had a single declaration of war against me in this entire campaign. All the wars I'm currently in are ones I started. Just gonna point that out as well when it comes to AI behavior. I don't think I've had a single declaration of war in this entire campaign, and you don't even want to declare war. Sure, early on you may want to spread some cults, but once you start spreading cults, you just can do the spread of cults passively, because you just get the Chamber of Agony, and that gives you a decent enough chance of spreading the cult every single turn. That doesn't create a good campaign dynamic. It simply can't create a good campaign dynamic, regardless of what Creative Assembly might think. Also, fun fact, the unique resource that you need, cult supplies, in order to construct buildings in general, is going to be so damn plentiful by like the mid game or even past the early game that, well, you'll end up stacking up thousands of them. Same with grimoires for the Changing of Ways, and I've actually been using the Changing of Ways over here in quite a few ways. So we get major issues in how this campaign ends up being played. Like, you don't want to completely eliminate the faction because it's going to hurt your economy, and yet you still want to declare war, because the best way to build cults quickly is, or at least early on, is to attack an enemy settlement and basically sack it, or just choose the build cult option. So you end up potentially starting a lot of wars that you can't lose, but you don't want to win. And then you end up spending dozens and dozens and dozens of turns. Like, I think over 60 turns of this campaign. Like, this campaign could have been over 60 or 50 turns ago if I hadn't been forced to run around the entirety of the Empire, Norska, Grand Cafe, Darklands, Badlands, and Southlands, just to do some damn fucking objectives that I had no chance of failing. It was just a question of wasting my time. Also, they're bugged, I might add. Yeah, they're bugged. So the last one I got was the Norskan Kislev one to win 12 battles against the following race. It bugged out at 7 for a long time. Then I basically broke my vassal agreement with the Björslings over here. Broke that vassal agreement, took Hellpit, sacked Hellpit, and that somehow magically completed. And the reason I even sacked, or rather raised Hellpit to the ground, and the reason I raised Hellpit to the ground, because one of the objectives is to sack Hellpit. By the way, sacking settlements is not an option. I guess building a cult is what counts as sacking a settlement. And that didn't complete, but all of a sudden the ritual combat objective completed. That's also an issue. Like, by the way, not only are these objectives like just such a grind to do so, like it takes you so many turns, you're not really risking anything, you're not challenged as a player, you're not challenged in battles, and yet you might have a lot of battles every turn, but it's like your army is going to pulverize everything in your path. Like a tier 2 army, which can be made up 100% of Tangors and Lord, can wipe out late-game armies at this point. There is no army that an army of Tangors, even at this late stage in the campaign, maybe the actual endgame crisis armies, and even then I would not put my money on them. And I'm not even, like, at one point I just stopped giving a shit about, like, fighting the campaign, because when I realized how pointless it was, and I just kept moving my armies around to complete objectives. And let's talk about those objectives, because they also feel meaningless. They give you a very powerful rewards. Yes, like these are the trickster rewards. They're very significant. Any faction in the game, Kugaf, doesn't matter who had these kind of benefits, would be top tier. The fact that you already start very strong and you get ridiculously like 20 armor for all units in all armies. Holy shit. I mean, it's absurd. It's a level of absurdity. Now, you need to have some rewards for those objectives. I get that, but it ends up being absurd. The only thing I wouldn't complain about is the casualty replenishment, because that was Creative Assembly's solution to the piss poor replenishment that Siege has by default. But how about fixing the baseline problem? No. You can get faction-wide casualty replenishment. You start with 10% in one turn. You get 10% more from research here, 20% from faction base, and then you get up to 30% from all the schemes that are available. You're at the casualty replenishment cap with no heroes, no lord skills, just research and schemes. I don't think I need to explain how that is absurdly broken, removes any element of challenge, removes any kind of sense of satisfaction, because you know even if you fuck up royally, you'll recover from that. Hell, the only challenge in this campaign might be to not lose entire armies because you're too damn bored out of your mind to actually fight battles manually. Because the battles themselves are not exactly stellar. Even against powerful Legendary Lords, even against powerful armies, it just ends up being a pretty boring and forgettable experience. Because you know you're not risking anything. You know you can't lose. And while I understand there are Legendary Lords which also have that same dynamic, in virtually every other campaign in the game, you at least give a shit about the armies you have. Like, again, I'm just going to look at this army right here, right? Look at what I'm able to recruit here. Yes, they are rank 1 chosen, but they're still chosen. And I can make a full stack, 2 full stacks, 3 full stacks, 4 full stacks in a couple of turns that nothing will stand up against 3 full stack of chosen. And I don't care. I don't care at all. I have no reason to care about my faction. I have no reason to care about my heroes. And as for the schemes, the main campaign mechanic, they're meaningless. The reason they're meaningless is because the effects of these schemes, if you're playing on an actual difficulty and not snoozing around on normal, they end up being relatively meaningless. Well, with the exception of, like, the one thing that might be substantial is that I somehow got Trog over here in Ulf 1. That was kind of fun. That's the only scheme that I would say was genuinely worthwhile. Because now he's at war with Ulf 1, I think. Yeah, he's actually at war with Torvres. It's like... And the reason he got here is because I teleported a bunch of Norscan armies. Granted, it was supposed to be against Wulfric, but because I think it's because Wulfric was confederated by Trog that it ended up being Trog. And it's like now he's wiping out Torvres. That's the only meaningful scheme, I might add, of all the ones that I've done in this campaign. Like, you have the scheme in Cafe where it's like, oh, the Great Bastion is destroyed. Well, the Great Bastion was already destroyed in this campaign long before that. Oh, and you got a dozen or over a dozen rogue armies spawning that were eliminated in one turn, every single one of them, by the AI garrisons and army. Talk about a lot of effort for nothing. Oh, the Darklands, you spawned greenskin labor rebellions that again got wiped out in a single fucking turn. Or the Empire, you have a civil war, quote unquote, starting. There was a civil war, it amounted to zilch, I might add. Well, to be fair, Karl Franz almost got wiped out by Vlad and Gelt, thanks to that civil war. And I'm not sure how much that civil war effort that I put in played in that, but I guess he did almost get wiped out. Or we can look, or we can consider like the Badlands and Southlands. You can steal the Black Pyramid and Nagash. That's a fun idea initially, until you realize what all that does. The Black Pyramid of Nagash still stays in Khemri. It's just like you get this model over a settlement. Like you can take it to Cafe, and it's like 3 rogue armies of Tomb Kings are gonna show up. Out of those 3 rogue armies, only one's still standing. So the schemes feel relatively cheap and meaningless. And the ultimate impact of all that you're doing feels cheap and meaningless. You don't even feel like a troll. Really, you don't even get really the satisfaction of being a troll against factions. Like, you initially think, oh, that's great, I just screwed over those factions. Like, you know, I caused Greenskin rebellions that screwed over the Chaos Dwarfs, and then it just ends up amounting to zilch in the campaign, which is pretty disappointing. So, ends up feeling very boring and forgettable. Immortal Empires is a campaign mode designed around the idea of building a massive empire and having scalability and having reason to care about building a massive empire. The reason you want to build a massive empire is because if you don't, you're going to fall behind, and eventually bigger and bigger threats are going to show up and ruin your day. You can play a campaign with limited provinces, but the best way to play the campaign is to get to expand as quickly as possible. But to expand, so you take risks, you push your economy, you have reasons to get a lot of armies, but you push your economy. You have to balance that economy. You have to balance how many armies you have and where you're going to leave yourself vulnerable and where you're going to advance. You have to care about diplomacy. You have to care, like, let's say I'm playing a campaign as Katrin, who's wiped out over here. Like, well, one of the things I have to worry about if I'm playing a campaign as Katrin, I have to worry about dealing with the Norscans here in the initial province, then dealing with Frot and Azazel, then Trog, but also being wary of the fact that I have Draika and Azak just directly to the south of me at the beginning, and I really, really don't want to have to deal with either of them. And then you have the long-term complications of Archeon, the Chaos Dwarfs, and just Norsca in general to deal with in the campaign. And while Katrin is a horrible campaign in a lot of ways, you have to worry about diplomacy with certain factions, who you're going to diplomatically deal with, who you're not going to diplomatically deal with, where are you going to commit your resources in a campaign, how are you going to commit those resources, whereas the Changeling, you just don't give a shit. You can genuinely play this entire campaign with a single army and never lose a single battle and never have any risks, never have any genuine dilemmas. And without that kind of gameplay, it's just a really awful campaign to play. That's where I stand on this. Creative Assembly probably was thinking that, oh, look, we can make a objective-based campaign. Great idea. Execution, CA. Execution. Risk-reward. Challenge. But then again, Creative Assembly, like, I'm going to say it outright, whenever I watch videos from Creative Assembly, it really seems to me that they don't know how to play this game on normal. On normal, right? And I'm going to also say it. What we want as players fundamentally, and I think a lot of people will agree with at least this aspect, we want what we're doing between clicking this button once and clicking it the next time to be as interesting and compelling as possible. We want to have something to do that actually means something. And when I say we want to have something to do, I'm not talking about 1,000 or 100,000 garrison battle. I'm not talking about wasting turns in a campaign, because this is where I cringe when I watch Creative Assembly videos. It's like, oh, we're besieging a settlement and we're gonna wait 4 turns to build up siege equipment. What? Like, who the fuck plays a game like that? Like, genuinely, who the hell that has any experience playing Total War games wastes more than 1 turn in a siege? Genuinely. Like, 2 turns at most if you have to build a battering ram just so you can attack the settlement. But that is it. That's the essence of what you're doing in a siege situation. You spend 1 turn if you don't have siege attacker or unit with siege attacker, like siege equipment or some big monster. You spend 1 turn. That is it. You spend 1 fucking turn building a battering ram, and then you attack the settlement. If you can't take the settlement in that 1 turn, you don't attack in the first place. And this is basic stuff. We're not talking legendary, get good, 2,000 ELO players here. We're talking here like basic competency in gameplay. And yet you see video after video after video from Creative Assembly where they do the exact opposite. I understand. There's a marketing angle. There's all that. But it just feels to me like when I see these kind of things, or when you see the ideas that they implemented in Realms of Chaos with all the factions they created in Realms of Chaos, Grand Cafe, even though Grand Cafe ended up being the best out of the bunch. But when you look at the principles and the campaign mechanics of all of the factions in Warhammer 3, the launch ones, you just see a developer that's completely divorced from the very reality of their games. And we're not talking here the reality of Immortal Empires. We're talking here, or even Warhammer in general, we're talking here of the reality that's existed since Rome 1. Like, how detached do you have to be from your own titles, from the understanding of that? But, well, this is the same company that made the Realms of Chaos campaign. This is the same company that made the Vortex campaign. I thought that was a brilliant idea. Look, I understand, as a developer, making new and unique ideas is hard, and making especially unique ideas that fit well within the campaign style. But if you're just shoving shit on top of a campaign system that plays in a particular way, and you throw in ideas that go completely against that, how the hell is that going to end up working well? Hint, it won't. It won't. It hasn't. Every single time they have done this stupid shit, it has always worked poorly. The Changeling is just the last in a long, long list of campaigns, legendary lords, characters, where Creative Assembly has adopted this mentality. Now, I'm not saying that Total War should be the way Immortal Empires. I'm not saying every campaign should be the same. What I'm saying is, if they are trying to make unique campaigns, they either need to adapt the game to fit within those campaign systems that they're developing, or they need to do an overhaul of how their campaigns are being played in general, which I would very much welcome, don't get me wrong. But it seems clear to me that first off, Creative Assembly needs to understand how to play their own game. And I don't want that to sound extremely arrogant. I certainly do not consider myself the best Total War player at the end of the day. I am not. There are many people that are far better than me, have far more patience than me to begin with. And I'm not talking about cheesing or anything like that. If we want to talk about cheesing, there's a lot of things you can do there, right? But there's just that enormous disconnect that I do see over here in DLC, in this particular DLC, which I didn't see in the Forge of Chaos Dwarfs, except like the trailers that they showed, the marketing of it, which was completely disconnected from the reality of their game. But Forge of Chaos Dwarfs was brilliant because it works well within the game systems. The Changeling is not. So I really wonder what Thrones of Decay is going to be. And I certainly hope we won't get another campaign like this. It's disappointing as well, because when I first started playing this campaign, I actually was enjoying it. I was enjoying a Siege demonic campaign for the first time in Warhammer 3. Imagine that. And then you realize just what you're in store for. Is really sad. Cosine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.